From the bleachers to the bar, this is the Home Runs and Handshakes podcast. That's right, disembodied voice that sounds suspiciously like me. This is indeed episode 5 of Home Runs and Handshakes. I am James Neveau, and I am joined for this special Monday frou-frou edition of the podcast by right-handed bench depth extraordinaire, Frank Nova. Frank, all right, what's the deal here? Are you making a social commentary on Justin Turner? What's the deal with the name today?
Well, I certainly can't be worse.
That's certainly true.
Call me whatever you want. Yeah, call me what you want. Call me Maurice, and I'll speak of the pompatus of love. I'm easy.
You know, this is already off to a rollicking start. I already can tell that I missed you last week when we did not have you on the pod. I guess we can go ahead and throw it out there for the listeners. How did you enjoy the Ringo Starr show down there in St. Augustine? Were you able to throw tobacco at him?
I did not throw tobacco at Ringo, but there was apparently some sort of a nasty bug going around the band because one of the all-stars was a scratch that night, which was Colin Hay. So I did not get my 3-minute work songs that I would have enjoyed, but that's what happens. That's what happens when you're dealing with a veteran roster like the Ringo Starr All-Stars. And Ringo himself sounded a little raspy too.
I suppose that if you're going to end up losing out on something, a minute work song probably is not the end-all be-all of the experience when you go see the All-Stars. But hey, you know what? We're not going to sit here and mince words here. By the way, I like your shirt because I just hit the Gallon Club myself with the Red Cross. So get out there and donate blood, people.
Yeah, if you can, and if it's something you're up to doing. I mean, some people get squeamish about it, and
Sure.
Some people just are physically unable, and I understand that. Every other week I donate platelets.
Yeah, I have been donating regularly for about a year now. I'm type O negative blood, so I definitely feel the compulsion to do that. So that is not that everybody needed to know my blood type. I'm not really sure what negative consequences can come of this, but now you all know this, all of you dozens of listeners that we have. So, all right, you know what? Enough talk about Ringo Starr and blood, which are definitely topics everybody cares about. I think we need to get into a little bit of baseball talk here. And when Jeremy Deemer was co-hosting the show last week, we had kind of talked about what our expectations were for that series in St. Louis and then in Houston. And we both kind of agreed. We thought a 3-4 trip was probably kind of the most likely outcome, but we were hoping for a 4-3. Well, our realism ended up coming out on top there, and we ended up being correct that they split in St. Louis, lost 2 out of 3 to the just buzzsaw Houston Astros. Like, if you look at all the injuries that team has had to deal with and the fact that they're still arguably one of the best teams in Major League Baseball, Frank, it is pretty insane that they've been able to do what they've done. But I got to say, losing 4 out of 7 on that road trip, not the biggest shock in the entire world, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, just kind of strange the way they did it. Watching Horton get his brains beat in wasn't great.
Nope.
And yesterday was just one of those, Jameson Taillon pitched such a gutty game, and he just came up 1 out short. And, that's what happens sometimes. And you could see that, Craig Counsell really wanted to coax 5 innings out of Taillon after the 33 pitch first inning.
Yeah, you could definitely tell that was the play. And Taillon is just such a pro that you saw him grinding through his last couple of starts when he was getting really victimized by the long ball. This was more of the kind of gutted out performance that we've seen this season from Taillon for sure.
Yeah. And, and the other part of the problem was you couldn't have picked a worse pitcher for the Cubs to face in that situation. Just ground ball after ground ball after ground ball after ground ball.
He absolutely did what you fully expect Valdez to do in those situations. And again, and they also had to face McCullers in this series too. It's not like the Cubs were in a get off light, and they did have quite a good offensive showing on Saturday too, which was very nice to see, especially with Kyle Tucker hitting a long ball against his former team. I think he had a 4-hit game in that one.
4-hit game and 3 RBIs?
Yep. Had a really solid game. And it was really funny because kind of all the different components of that trade have ended up like doing something in that series. Cam Smith had a couple of majestic home runs in that series, and then Isaac Paredes is up to 17 home runs now, which I was fully not expecting him to.
Oh,
Well,
he is.
I
He
guess
is
to a
so
degree, though, you kind of
he's
knew
so
with
tailor made for that
a
ballpark.
Crawford box, it's just going to pepper that with home
Yeah.
runs. Like I don't have the splits in front of me, Frank, but I'd have to imagine that he probably hit at least 14 of his home runs in that ballpark. Like it just seems like it was built with him in mind.
And his spray chart for his career is basically just a red line down the, just this red streak down the left field line.
Yeah, he's
That's
basically
just what he
Bernie
does.
Sanders, where it's just everything to the left. Okay, that's enough political commentary for the day. I did want to bring up one other thing in this series, just kind of in general, besides the Cam Smith show. I did want to talk about just kind of the way that we had kind of discussed recently. The Cubs seemed like they were very reliant on home runs for their offense. Like their percentage of runs scored via the home run had kind of gone up. And I think we saw it again in this series where, yeah, they were working some good at bats, but it was, again, those long balls kind of carrying the day. And I do want to ask you, like, if you think that that's something that we need to be at all like concerned about. Is it something you think is kind of a natural byproduct of playing in a stadium like that and an environment that's just really warm lately, just with the recent heat wave we've seen? Like, what's the way you feel about the kind of power hitting extravaganza the Cubs have been putting on as opposed to kind of generating runs in any other fashion?
Well, I think what's happening is, if you make a mistake to a Cubs hitter, somebody's getting a souvenir.
Yeah.
But I think one of the bigger issues right now is the fact that you've got your starting 8 players and or starting 9 actually because of the DH, but
Mm-hmm.
you got your starting 9 in the lineup and absolutely nobody else you can count on to come in and even have a 1 for 4 or a 2 for 4 day just to spell somebody. It's like,
Yeah.
the Cubs bench has been so bad right now. You're like, oh my God, Jed Hoyer would give his left nut for a David Bodie type right now.
I mean, I think
And
other than Reese McGuire, right? Like that's pretty much the only
right.
kind of guy they've been able to plug in the lineup and get anything out of recently.
And that is apparently going to be an issue in a couple weeks too, because Miguel Amaya is starting to work his way back.
Yep, which
But
welcome back. Like I totally am down with that, especially if it means you can end up giving guys like Hap and Crow-Armstrong and even Kyle Tucker occasional days off and have Seiya Suzuki move around in the outfield. I think that's going to be a really good thing for the Cubs to be able to get that back and to be able to start doing that and have Amaya potentially DH at times if you want him to.
yeah, I know in the past I've brought up the name Mike Talkman, but the other thing is down in Iowa, Kevin Alcantara, if he had elevated his game enough to warrant a call up, he's a guy who can give you good defense or passable defense at the very least at all 3 positions. And so
Mm-hmm.
he could be a guy who could come in, spell the guys in the outfield without hurting you too much defensively. And he's he can't hit on the level of certainly not on the level of Kyle Tucker or Pete Crow-Armstrong, but at least on the level of not even on the level of Ian Happ, but he can at least be enough. Well, you could see where he could run into the occasional fastball and cause some damage, and he's a fast enough runner to where he can get some havoc going on the base paths. And I think one of the things you're starting to see with Pete Crow is he's had 1 day off all year.
Yeah.
And now that it's getting hot, he's starting to kind of hit a wall, and he's not going to get a breather at the All-Star game. He's going to
No,
go.
certainly not. He'll be going to Atlanta for sure.
He's going to Atlanta and probably starting.
Yeah, well, yeah, depending on voting, but I can't imagine a scenario where he's not a starter based on how many votes that he got during the phase 1 of the voting.
Right. So he's not going to get a breather, and Kyle Tucker's not going to get a breather. Seiya and Hap can, take a couple days off and drink their respective coffees and, just kind of recharge a little bit. And the other guy who really kind of needs it is Dansby Swanson. Dansby Swanson, every year he's been a Cub. I didn't pay as much attention when he was a Brave. I just knew he was good as a Brave.
Yeah.
But I think he looks in the mirror and he doesn't see Dansby Swanson. He sees Cal Ripken, and he's not. He
Yeah.
needs to take some. He needs to take some days off.
Also, did want to bring up, you brought up Dansby. I feel like this is going to be a good time to ask this question. What'd you make of him batting cleanup this week? I saw quite a bit of consternation, including for me, that he was doing that. And then, as we've kind of learned on this podcast, anytime we say literally anything about anyone, the opposite thing immediately happens because we are the ultimate reverse jinx podcast. Put that on a t-shirt.
Right. Um, and it's one of these things. Whatever they were seeing in Dansby in the few games before they got to Houston, they said, okay, he's starting to feel it. Let's get him in there.
Mm-hmm.
And he hit the ball well. And it could also be just the thing where playing in, like, they you can go on to Baseball Reference, you can look at his splits, you can go on to was it Baseball Savant is the website where you get all your StatCast numbers, and you can look and you can kind of get an idea of where a ball player can succeed. Like, a guy might do better in, say, a place like Houston, where it's indoors, the ball carries a little bit better. So, balls that would be on the warning track with the wind blowing in at Wrigley Field are majestic home runs in Houston.
Yeah, absolutely. The one other thing I did want to bring up if we're going to talk about reverse jinxes, I do have to bring up Nico Horner, who I think on Monday I pointed out had one of the best WARs of a Cubs player who hadn't hit a home run. All he did this week was hit 3 home runs. So broke out of that in a big way. Also, Frank, this kind of took me by surprise a little bit. Do you know he's got a 3.2 WAR this season? Nico
Oh, yeah.
Warner quietly having a hell of a season, honestly. I knew he was solid. I didn't realize he was quite that solid, I think.
I don't have, again, Baseball Savant. I don't have it in front of me right now. I want to say he is 10 outs above average.
That's so good, man.
I know he's leading major league infielders. In
Yes.
fact, the Cubs currently have OAA leaders at 2 different positions. You got Nico and Pete Crow.
Nico and Pete Crow. That sounds like a really good band name.
Right?
Yeah.
Call the obvious guys. Have them print a shirt up.
That's right. I don't want to get too far into Dansby, though, because we are going to get into a few other things later on in the podcast about the first half of the season, predictions for the second half. So we're not going to delve too deeply into that. I did want to bring up, before we do, though, kind of a little bit of a pitching update. I know we had talked on the podcast last week when you were, being treated to the dulcet tones of Richard Starkey. We had talked about
Sir Richard Starkey. Thank you.
Sorry, my apologies. Okay. Somebody the other day, I'm trying to remember who was recently knighted, and they were writing a headline about it, and it's like, it's Sir Gary Oldman to you now. Like, let's make sure that we're doing that. I know we fought an entire war about this stuff, but that's going to be my random hot take of the day. Put some respect on the name of a Sir Gary Oldman, please. You're absolutely right to call me out on that, Frank. I shouldn't have done that.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm going to get off my high horse, and we're going to get back to pitching here. I wanted to bring up, we had discussed whether it was going to be Colin Ray or Ben Brown that would end up getting the boot from the Cubs rotation when Shota and Managa came back. We did find out it was Ben Brown. And also, Cubs got a nice little bonus as well and got Porter Hodge back this week, too. So just kind of curious, Frank, for you, now that they have Shota back and now that you've kind of got Ben Brown down there in the minor leagues, I still would assume this sets the table primo style to get another starting pitcher at the deadline. It just feels like this is a need that is absolutely screaming out on this team, and one that I think they can address via the trade market, given the guys that are going to be available.
Yeah, and especially if they're going to get a guy who is, I mean, they certainly have capital for trade. One of the questions is going to be, are they going to go after a guy who's going to be a free agent at the end of the year, or are they going to go after somebody who's got some years left on his, like, Sandy Alcantara's got 2 years left.
I believe it's two. It's either 2 or 3.
Yeah, so you're back in a Jose Quintana situation where you've got this guy who's really good, and Quintana was really good. I mean, people like to dwell on what you gave up and not what you got.
Right.
in those types of trades. But um, but the fact is, if you get a Sandy Alcantara, you get him for a couple years. It's going to cost, right off the bat, I'll tell you that they'd probably want Ben Brown.
Yeah.
Well, they'd probably ask for Kate Horton and settle for
And get
Ben
told
Brown.
no, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. Yeah.
Um,
And I also think they're going to have to dig into some of the Cubs outfield prospects too. I think that's a no-brainer where the Marlins would pursue options.
well, the only problem with the Marlins is the three guys they have on the team that don't completely suck are their three outfielders.
Well, they may end up trading one of those guys. You never know. Like if they end up going out and getting a guy who's kind of blocked with the Cubs, whether it's an Alcantara or whether it's an Owen Casey, you kind of wonder if maybe that plays into that calculus a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and then also wanted to float that Bob Nightingale, who I'm sure everybody in our audience kind of has mixed feelings about, did point out the Cubs have also kicked the tires on Mitch Keller and Luis Severino as well. So definitely, it seems that the three guys.
My feelings aren't mixed. My feelings aren't mixed. I think he's terrible.
Anyway, point being, Frank, not to be an indictment of Bob Nightingale.
Right.
But just to point out, what do those three guys have in common? They're all under contract control for multiple seasons after this. You're not hearing the Cubs get linked to a Zach Gallen or a Merrill Kelly yet. You're not hearing those kind of one-year rental type guys in the pitching rotation. And frankly, I think that's the right way to go about it because you're going to end up having questions beyond this season, the rotation. You may as well address them now. And as we've seen with the Jameson Taillon contract, the contracts that you already have agreed to end up looking fairly decent if you're Jed Hoyer when you look at guys like him and Seiya Suzuki. And so you don't get scared away by bringing in guys that have term because you're going to end up spending more than that on the open market if you end up trying to go out and sign somebody this offseason as opposed to bringing in somebody who's already got that control.
Yeah, there's one guy who'd probably be a real good value over long term, a guy named Kyle Tucker.
Yeah, I think I've heard of him. Can you, maybe for our listeners at home, can you kind of refresh them a little bit on who he is?
Well, I wrote a song about him. My girl loves Kyle Tucker every night. She wishes he'd sign an extension.
That's not where we thought you were going with that, Frank. And I appreciate you keeping this podcast PG-13.
I'm sure there's at least one listener with a filthy mind.
No, they probably all thought the way that I thought. They were like, "Oh, here we go. This is the forklift territory. We know what we're getting now."
Nope, I don't do hockey anymore.
Well, kids, you know what? Just to kind of let people in behind the curtain, we absolutely did have a 10-minute discussion before this podcast started about NHL free agency. So there's still a little bit of hockey floating around in that brain of yours. I do have to ask you a little bit on that.
Yeah, I also have. I feel like I'm bothering our favorite noted jerk because I feel like I text him every day with something about.
You know what? I bet he enjoys it. If we're being honest, he seems like that kind of guy.
Yeah, well, I told you I tried killing him with food in Chicago. So
you know what? That's not hard to do. Anybody that comes into town, like you immediately feel a compulsion to either give them the delicious concoction / poison that is Malort, or you try to kill them with food. It feels like that's the.
I did both.
That's the real Chicago handshake, at least to me, is, the drink, but also the have every type of food you can possibly imagine.
We didn't become the city of broad shoulders, by accident.
Frank, this seems like a really good opportunity, actually, to bring up something that I saw in the news today, and that is a new menu offering at Wrigley Field that's going to be available this week and this week only. That's right, folks. It is the Chi-Town Pizza, and if you don't like the term Chi-Town, I don't blame you. This is a marketing thing. It is Home Run and Pizza and Vienna Beef have partnered up to produce a pizza. Get a load of this, Frank. This is what's on this thing. It's your normal pizza. It's got mozzarella and tomato sauce, but it also has Vienna thin sliced beef and giardiniera. That is only going to be available for this week's homestand at Wrigley Field against the Guardians and the Cardinals. Frank, I got to be honest with you. I would eat this. I would certainly try this. And
I would take that to the house.
Happy birthday, America. Have a gigantic hunk of food. Yeah, I know that Home Run and Pizza kind of has a mixed reaction in Chicago. I feel like a lot of folks, obviously there's other pizzas that they like more or whatever, but I'm 1,000% trying that. That's 100 out of 10 as far as I'm concerned.
Home run in. I mean, home run in is a perfectly cromulent pizza. It's
See, I can go with that's a perfect word for that. I literally could not have thought of a better one. So, to our listeners and our viewers who got to see that beautiful concoction, please let us know if you do try it at Wrigley Field. I do not have tickets to any games this weekend. The thought has definitely crossed my mind. I might try to go to the game on Thursday night against the Guardians. We will see, but I will report back with my findings.
So just to refresh my memory, it's a home run in pizza. Is it a
Yes.
sausage pizza?
They did not say that there was sausage on it. The only meat that they mentioned was the thin
Was the
sliced roast
Italian
beef.
beef?
Yeah,
And then jardinere.
that
Okay.
is correct. And mozzarella cheese, lest we forget.
Okay. Duly noted. I mean,
I'm not sure if they like sprinkle au jus on it or not, but I personally would.
I think I might. I can certainly do a DIY on that down here. I mean, I
Please
could go
do.
to I could go to the store and they sell home run and pizza at the store, and
Literally
there's
just grilled up one of those the other day. It was delicious.
yeah, and also, well, there's actually multiple bars down here called the Friendly Confines,
Hmm.
and
Are they affiliated in any way with each other?
oh yeah, there's three of them I think, and they're all owned by the same people, and they're
Oh, I
all
thought it was just like a big turf war, like that they all had the name and they all like fought about
no,
it.
no, they're all owned by the same people, and you walk. I mean, the if you go online and look at Friendly Confines, Winter Park, Florida, you'll see that the logo looks like the marquee at Wrigley Field, and you drive past and they have like ivy painted on the side of the building and everything. But you can get a beef in there, and it will get the job done. If I don't feel like making the half-hour drive to Portillo's, I can get a beef there.
All right. Well, again, you're gonna have to let us know how this laboratory experiment goes, Frank. We are all very interested in that. All right. It is time now. We've talked about food. We've done the appetizer round of all of this. Now it is time for the entree. For those of you who aren't aware, who maybe have let the passage of time kind of go beyond your understanding and your viewpoint, we've passed the halfway point in the baseball season, ladies and gentlemen. We are officially past 81 games, and I know the All-Star break hasn't happened yet, blah, blah, blah. Mathematically, this is like astronomical spring and meteorological spring. This is the real second half of the season, folks. And Frank and I are going to give out a few awards, I think, to kind of mark the occasion. And the first one I've got for you, Frank, who has been your biggest surprise so far of the season for the 2025 Chicago Cubs?
Seiya Suzuki.
I think that's a pretty good pick. Go ahead and
He's
defend your reasoning, but I definitely would go with you on this.
well, I mean, we always saw glimpses of Seiya and what Seiya was capable of doing. And then this year, he just has completely taken off. He's already got more home runs this year than he's had in any full season he's played.
Yep.
And a big part of it too is he's been healthy, and DHing has kept him healthy, and kept him hitting. So he is my most surprising player, with probably an honorable mention going to Drew Pomeranz.
I think that's a great pick also, and one that I kind of overlooked a little bit when I was kind of doing my research on this, because I also picked a position player and a pitcher. Dansby Swanson, for me, I want to say that I'm really surprised by the fact that his slugging has rebounded to almost what it was in his last couple of years of Atlanta. It is not something that we've seen from him the last few years with the Cubs. It really does feel like he's hitting the ball harder. I do think that offseason procedure that he had on the injury that he'd been dealing with, I think has really helped. And quite obviously, having that defense up the middle is just so freaking important for this Cubs team. And so getting the type of power they've been able to get out of Dansby Swanson, I think has been really hugely important. And then for pitcher, I got to give credit where it's due to Danny Palencia, who has really come in a tough situation for the Cubs. They really did not have a lockdown closer after Ryan Presley kind of went up in smoke and Porter Hodge got hurt. And Palencia came in, and for all of the hype that he had been kind of subject to during his time with the Cubs, we saw the fastball. We knew that could potentially play if he could ever kind of harness it. It's been really great to see him kind of, grow into that role and to be the closer for this team. And I've really been impressed with the way that he's handled his business. So I do have to give a special shout out in this category to Danny Palencia.
Oh yeah, he's been straight filth.
Yeah.
And, he had the Luke Little issue where, he could pump it in there, but didn't necessarily know where it was going. And apparently, the tutelage he's gotten from Ryan Presley in
Very
the
helpful.
clubhouse,
Yeah.
and because Presley calls him Mijo, which is my son, and Palencia calls him Viejo, which is old man.
Yep. There you go. You get a
So
Spanish lesson from Frank Nova today, folks. Bet you didn't think you were going to get that, did you?
yeah, don't pay for Duolingo, just listen to us.
That's right. We're going to teach you everything that you could possibly ever need to know. All right. Unfortunately, the other side of the coin with the biggest surprise is a biggest disappointment. Frank, which member of the Chicago Cubs has been most disappointing to you?
Well, through no fault of his own, Justin Steele. You
Yeah,
know,
that's kind of a
you
bummer.
yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have seen a full season of Steele and Shota,
Yep.
and especially because Steele's last start before his surgery, he looked like John Lester. He looked
Sure
so
did.
good, and he was just like, okay, here's what an ace is supposed to pitch like.
Yep.
And it was a cold night, and just did the final number on his elbow.
Yep.
Um,
Unfortunately, too, like that was like just kind of it was just one of those things where like you get like this brilliant pitching performance and you're like you get so jazzed up, and then for that to happen, it would have been really easy. I feel like for the Cubs to like kind of crater a little bit, because at that point they still had all those games left against the Padres and the Dodgers. Like they knew this was going to be a really hard run of games they were going to have to deal with, and they made it through really well, and they've built up a lead in the division, and this would have, I think, killed lesser Cubs teams of previous seasons, and it just did not do that this season. And so I do, even though this is biggest disappointment by nature is going to be kind of a negative thing, I do think the credit has to be given to the Cubs for not folding when that happened, because that was just a body blow when that happened, especially like you said, the way he had pitched in that Texas game.
yeah, and my position player is probably John Birdie.
Yeah.
I really thought he was going to be the guy I talked about earlier, where he can kind of come in and give guys a spell here and there, and it
Mhm.
just hasn't happened.
I like how neither one of us is going to mention Justin Turner, because neither one of us particularly thought he was going to
No,
give much. And Ryan Presley, I think we all saw the Hector Neris movie, and I also would not say that I'm disappointed or surprised by what he's gone through. I will say the one kind of guy in that category where you probably were like, well, logically, that was always a possibility. Probably going to be Gage Workman. I did not see that blowing up the way that it did. I thought that he was going to be kind of a solid option in terms of kind of like a reserve infielder, kind of give the Cubs something to think about, be able to give them, another option at the plate. And it just ended up being horrible and was a complete like failure as an experiment. So that's definitely on there. And then again, I do have to mention Ian Happ still really slugging well below his career average, and even what he was doing last season. I know recently he's had some kind of rumblings of maybe busting out in the second half, but I have to say, like, his slugging this season has just not been up to snuff, and they do need him to drive the ball with a bit more authority for sure.
yeah, and he's just not covering. I mean, left field is not a premium defensive position, but he is not covering the ground out there. I'm not
Thank
gonna
God
sit
for PCA, dude.
Yeah, I'm not gonna sit there and say he's George Bell out there, but
No, 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 no. And I'm also not going to be like they need to have Seiya Suzuki out there in left field. I still think that Ian's a better defensive option
right.
there than he is.
Yeah.
What's your favorite moment of the season so far? I'll go first while you think about this. I've got
All
two,
right.
and one of them is kind of a recency bias thing, but that Palencia moment the other day where he struck out the Cardinals and got to jawing with Wilson Contreras, that was just such a like baller moment where, to borrow a term that I know you've used on infinite occasions, Contreras was being a pudwhack in that situation. There was just no reason on God's green earth why Palencia would have deliberately hit him in that situation, and Wilson acted like he had committed a Hague-worthy offense. That, to me, just showed not only like what Palencia is made of in that moment when he's drawn with Wilson Contreras, but also the fact that he was able to recover from that and just shut the Cardinals down like immediately. That was a boss level move for Danny Palencia. And then my honorable mentions, plural, is Pete Crow, like getting out onto the field further and further before the game-winning run is scored on multiple walk-offs. I think at a certain point, he's going to end up selling beer in the bleachers on a walk-off, and it's going to be a phenomenal moment.
Well, the other thing with the Palencia Contreras thing is it led to one of the probably my favorite burn that I've seen on social media all year, which is our friend Slack addressing Wilson Contreras, told him go eat a Crustable, which I just thought that was amazing.
He always has like a poetic way of saying these things.
I mean, he's always had that greatness in him.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who have not seen it play out on social media, I highly encourage you to go out and seek out Andrew Sislak, because he is a font of just really witty rejoinders and retorts. He is phenomenal.
But let me think. Well, again, one of my favorite things was that Justin Steele game against Texas, because you saw like just Justin Steele bathed in greatness that night. And
I guess, you know what? I kind of overlooked PCA with the diving catch and then the home run back to back.
Yeah, that would be another one of those.
Sick, dude. That was such a sick moment.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where, MLB just couldn't get it up on their social media fast enough. And
who can blame them? And then the Cubs had that awesome blue screen of death on the right field video board after that. I wish that game had played that Wednesday night, because that was epic. That was so funny.
Yeah, I mean, that was the funniest thing since Anthony Rizzo blew out the Budweiser sign.
Yep. Oh my God. Whew. And it was essentially the same home run, right? Just like a complete rip job that slammed into it, and you were just like, oh dear God.
Yeah, complete nuke. And it's so funny to see Pete Crow hit those home runs, because he doesn't have the body that leads you to believe that he's capable of that. It's not like when you look at Aaron Judge, and Aaron Judge kind of reminds you of the episode of the Munsters where Herman Munster played for the Dodgers. that's like every Aaron Judge at bat is Herman Munster.
You wouldn't be shocked if he walked up to home plate in a loincloth and a club and just bludgeoned a baseball. You really wouldn't. That's just the vibe that you get from him.
Yeah, but Pete Crow's a little guy. You hate this early in a guy's career to start comparing him to all-time greats, but just that swing and the amount of bat speed he's got is just, it's Ken Griffey Jr.
Yeah, it really is. And it just looks effortless too. It's not like he's going up there and wailing at the ball. It's just everything works in that kind of synchronicity and just bam. And I wish he had Ken Griffey Jr.'s on base percentage, but I will certainly take it if he wants to, mimic him in other ways for sure.
Right. I mean, he's certainly faster than Junior ever was.
That he definitely, oh my God. It's unbelievable how fast he is, how much ground he covers. His arm is so good. Though I was watching the game the other day, and I was telling a couple of buddies of mine, I was like, watch what he's about to do. Watch how this throw is going to come in and just be so on the money. And it really is. It's just completely wild, man. He has so many just incredible physical gifts and just continues to show them off. All right. Second half predictions, Frank. We're going to kind of turn the clock forward a little bit, and we are going to make some predictions on how we feel like the rest of the season is going to play out for the Chicago Cubs. I'm going to offer one to you, and I'm going to go ahead and see kind of what you feel about it. I'm going to throw this out there. I think the Cubs end up making bigger swings than perhaps we expect at the trade deadline, and I think they address both third base and starting pitcher in a significant way. I feel like with Jed Hoyer entering the last year of his contract, I think that he's going to be given carte blanche to really try to take advantage of kind of the vibe around this Cubs team, right? This feels like a group that has something special about it that could potentially make some noise in October if they have the right pieces. I just feel like the energy with this team is so positive, and I do feel like the Cubs are going to be in a position where they're going to want to capitalize on that. And if that involves getting Alcantara or it ends up getting a guy like Eugenio Suarez or whoever it is, I do feel like Jed Hoyer is going to feel very empowered by those kind of multiple motivating factors to go out and make those types of moves. And so I think my first prediction is the Cubs are not just going to make some sort of middling, borderline move at the trade deadline. I do think that they're going to take a pretty substantial swing at multiple positions.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I do think what they're going to try to do, at least for this year, is get a proven player at third base, because then what happens is Matt Shaw becomes your guy who can slot in at any infield position, and you know he he's not going to hit a ton for you, but he'll hit better than anybody else has been hitting. And he's also a guy you could put on the bases late in the game, and you know he's the second fastest guy in the Cubs.
Yeah, which is saying
Um,
something. Like to be second fastest to PCA, pretty damn good.
yeah. So I could see them, they're going to look at Suarez, they're going to look at Ryan McMahon, they're going to look at Alex Bregman.
Do you think that it plays into the calculus at all that guys like Bregman and Suarez are potentially in contract years? Do you think that the Cubs maybe favor that given what they have in Matt Shaw and them kind of hoping that he can bounce back next season? Do you think they're more likely to go with a rental at that spot?
Yeah. Yeah. I think long term, they want Matt Shaw to be the third baseman.
I agree with that. And
Um,
I do, by the way, think that it almost goes without saying. I do think Alex Bregman, if he ends up getting traded by the Red Sox, I do think that he ends up opting out of that contract.
yeah. Unless he winds up somewhere where he just finds himself in love with the city
Well, I
or in
think
love
I
with the
saw
team.
I saw a report that I think Scott Boras indicated that Bregman would be interested in re-signing with the Red Sox now. That I'm wondering if that would qualify for other teams too. Like it does kind of change the calculus a little bit on whether or not they're going to end up trading him. If he wants to stay and they feel like he's part of their 2026 plans, I mean, if he wants to re-sign, I don't know why you wouldn't just kind of short circuit all of that opt-out talk right now if you have the option to do it. It seems kind of rare in today's day and age.
And especially for Scott Boras to be saying it about
Yeah,
one of his clients.
absolutely, man. Good grief. How many you probably count on one hand the number of guys that he's ever said that about.
Yeah. So it's clearly something that Bregman said to him, or look, I love playing in Boston. I love Fenway Park. This is the team that drafted me. I want to stay here.
I do think if that becomes an availability, the Cubs absolutely have to do that. I feel like it would right one of the, the wrongs that they had during the offseason was not just kind of backing the Brinks truck up and giving Bregman this type of a contract, especially with a 1 year, like an opt out after the first year, would
Yeah.
have been a tailor-made situation for the Cubs.
And and again, there's options at third. If they can't get Bregman, they can, talk to the Rockies. At this point, would take pretty much anything in the world for Ryan McMahon.
Do you think that that's a move that the Cubs like? Does that actively make them better? A guy that is under team control but isn't the best hitter in the world. It feels like we're just getting a more expensive Matt Shaw in that situation.
Well, but he is a veteran, and he's somebody who can kind of hold the spot down, because Shaw will be better than Ryan McMahon at the
Okay.
plate. He's not currently, but it's one of these things where, success isn't always linear. Like last also, the Cubs are in a different position this year. Last year, they were able to bring Pete Crow back up from Iowa, and Council basically said, "Okay, kid, center field's yours. Do the best you can. Listen to the coaches, and we'll make a ball player out of you." This year, they're in first place. They can't afford to have that patience with Matt Shaw that they had with Pete
Yeah.
Crow last year. You would love to just say, "Okay, kid, third base is yours. Grow into the job," but you're trying to win in the division and go beyond that. And so, in that instance, you do need to look at a veteran. Yeah, I mean, Suarez would be the perfect guy.
Absolutely. 1,000%. I feel like there isn't a more tailor made situation for the Cubs than to add either him or Bregman. I feel like that is just like so easy of a call to make if you can, but also you have to keep in mind there are probably going to be 10 other teams calling on Suarez and Bregman if they're available. Like that just seems like it goes without saying.
Right, and I've even heard Cabrian Hayes' name getting floated out there.
I don't, as much as I think the Pirates are just willing to do anything that is ill-advised or not. I can't see a scenario where selling on Ke'Bryan Hayes now is a good idea.
No, I don't either. But
well, that's why we're not running.
I don't own the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Yeah. You want me to offer up another prediction for the second half, or do you got one that you want to toss out there?
And I do think they're gonna. If they go after Bregman, they're gonna talk to the Red Sox about Bregman. I also think at the same time they're gonna talk to the Red Sox about Aroldis Chapman.
Yes, 1,000%, absolutely. That feels. They're going to want bullpen help, and I feel like again Chapman just like fits the bill on what the Cubs need right now. I feel like that's a guy you plug in probably 7th inning, I'm guessing, and just like let it rip. I think that's a great call.
Yeah, and especially because it's good to have Porter Hodge back.
Yeah,
but Porter Hodge is bringing it in right now at like 93, 94. He's not letting it eat yet.
No, and he shouldn't be. I don't want him to do that in June. I want him to do that in August and in September. I don't want him.
But a lot of times these guys get hurt, and so they kind of hold back a little bit.
Yeah,
they're a little reticent before they just rear back and let it fly.
We've used the terms reticent and rejoinder today. What kind of Mensa meeting did we just launch, dude? Like, what are we doing?
Look, you were probably like the 10,000th nerdiest guy at the Weird Al concert last night.
All right, you got me there. I was surely outnumbered. Yes.
Yeah. You didn't even have your 12-sided die or whatever it is they use.
You know what? 12-sided die, Frank, are very useful. But if you want the real D&D dice, you have to have 20-sided die, because everybody knows a 20 is a crit, and that's what you're seeking out. So just make sure you remember that next time you talk to one of us D&D nerds.
Okay, I just acted on the assumption that you knew about Dungeons and Dragons.
You acted correctly, sir. I'm also going to start getting into some really beefy World War II history books now that I've turned 40 years old. So you've got me pretty well pegged, I think, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
You know what else I think is going to happen in the second half of the season?
You're going
the Ben Brown bullpen renaissance is going to be really something to see, man. And I'm glossing over what you just said. I'm going to go ahead and just stick with. I think Ben Brown is really going to make some serious noise in the second half of the season in the bullpen for this team. I think that that's ultimately going to be the design after they make additions in the rotation. I do think that Ben Brown ends up coming back, and that fastball just profiles so much better out of the bullpen than it does in the rotation. I think that that is a perfect spot for him, and I do think that he ends up coming back, in August. Even if it's like not until August after the trade deadline, I think that that's immediately going to be an impact area, and I think he's going to be really solid in that spot.
Has he gone yet in Iowa since he's been sent down?
I actually am not sure about that. I was going to ask you the same question. I had not seen if he had pitched yet in Iowa, but I think that obviously will be a pretty solid indicator of what they end up thinking that he's going to be able to do down there.
Yeah, I know. They're still trying to get Wicks straightened out.
Yeah, and I mean they should be, frankly. No, he is not pitched yet in Iowa.
Okay.
So I think that you hopefully you maybe get a guy like Wicks or a guy like Javier Assad to kind of bounce back into the mix here in the second half of the season, especially if you want to start. I don't know, maybe giving like Cade Horton or Colin Ray some time off. Like you don't want to. I don't think there was a scenario the Cubs envisioned that they were going to have Ray potentially make, every fifth start for the remainder of the season. I think they would at some point perhaps run into a little bit of an innings issue with him. And I'm certain that they don't want to run into an innings issue with Cade Horton either. And so I think that a guy like
Matthew Boyd.
Oh, perfectly said. I think that you're going to end up seeing other guys make starts at some point. And I do think that Jordan Wicks or a Javier Assad would be better equipped for that than a Ben Brown. But I do insist that I think he ends up coming up and ends up helping the bullpen.
Yeah, I can see that too. And, maybe Luke Little comes up at some point also.
Mm-hmm. That would be, hey, I'm totally down for that. If he can get his life figured out and he can be a potential asset to this bullpen, Do you really think that Chris Flexen and Drew Pomeranz are just going to continually be, just shoving for the Cubs? I don't think that they both are. I think that you have to have a guy like Luke Little maybe come in and end up making an impact at some point.
And the other guy that in the Cubs bullpen that I'd love to watch is Brad Keller, just because he comes out and he doesn't even look like he's exerting himself, and it's coming in at 98, 99.
Yep.
It's like the easiest 98, 99 I think I've ever seen from a Cubs pitcher.
The body language on him is unbelievable. Like, I would never think that he's actually giving like any sort of max effort. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Do you think the Cubs make the playoffs, Frank? Let's end the prediction segment with a very blunt question. Do you think the Cubs are dancing in October this year?
They are.
I believe so too. I do think they win the division. Not to discount the Cardinals or the Brewers, but I think that with the assets the Cubs are going to bring in at the trade deadline and the veteran leadership this team has, I think this is a playoff team, and I still do. They may not finish with the second best record in the National League, but I do think they're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah. They'll make the playoffs, and it would be great if they get a bye, but if they don't, they'll.
It's not the end of the world. We've seen it multiple times. That's not the end of the world for anybody.
It would be a lot better if they had a healthy Justin Steele, just because you've got to have that pitching depth.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, if you go out and get Alcantara, like you definitely have like the makings of a pretty darn solid rotation, and then you can move a guy like a Matthew Boyd or a Colin Ray into the bullpen potentially, and I think they could end up being really successful there. So
Matthew Boyd was great in the bullpen for Cleveland last year.
Absolutely. I think that's a no-brainer to me. Like, yeah, you could make an argument that he could be in the rotation, but I don't think there's a scenario where in a world that you have Imanaga, you have Alcantara, and you have Jamison Taillon, I don't think that Matthew Boyd cracks that group.
No. And, we don't know what Cade Horton's going to be looking like in September.
And that's kind of why I brought up like the innings thing. I'm wondering if maybe you start to see a little bit more management of that. I think that they are definitely looking long-term with him, and rightfully so.
Well, yeah. And you already saw it where he didn't go 5 games after his last start.
No, they're managing him for sure. And they should be. Again, I feel like that's exactly the right way to approach it. This is a guy you envision being in the top half of your rotation for the long term. Don't screw around with him right now. Do right by him, and you're going to reap the benefits of it later.
Yeah. And, going back to predictions, the other thing I think is you will see the Cubs trade for some depth. They're not just going to be looking for, the bright, shiny toys. They need to get a fourth outfielder. They need to get an infielder that they can plug into any of the 3 spots and, hit at some level that is above horrible.
Mm-hmm. I think Taylor Ward maybe fits that bill where he can play third base and he can play outfield. What would you think of a move like that?
Yeah, that would be a good one for sure.
I think that's a solid addition that helps you in multiple areas. I feel like I think Taylor Ward might be kind of an under the radar guy if they don't end up getting a Suarez. I think that could be a direction that they look at going.
Yeah, and he's the type of guy, even if he's in the last year of his contract, if he fits the role well, he's a guy you could bring back and it won't cost you a fortune.
And I'd much rather them do that than take a risk on a guy like Jeimer Candelario at this point. So I'm totally on board for that.
Well, there's no risk with Candelario.
The risk is you give him any playing time at all and he's got all. That's like the only risk. I mean, you could have a Gage Workman situation again. At least you're not paying him that much.
Yeah,
and what league minimum, right? Like I can't even. I think the Reds they DFA'd him, right? Like he's completely out of their organization now.
Yeah, no team can do anything until he clears.
Right.
It takes 10 days.
Yeah, that's coming up soon, and I highly doubt anybody's champing at the bit to go out and get a Jeimer Candelario. But
no.
Anyway, we're going to talk about a little bit more fun topic now, I think, and that is the All-Star game. We did mention the future of the Cubs will be on display in Atlanta. Owen Casey gets picked for the Future Stars game along with Jackson Wiggins, which I think is that's going to be a fun pick. I do hope that he ends up pitching in that game. And then the final round of All-Star voting going on right now, folks. If you want to try to ensure that your favorite Cub ends up in Atlanta, 3 guys made the finalist list. Of course, Kyle Tucker and PCA, both of whom I think have really solid opportunities to start. I think that there's definitely a chance one of them doesn't, just based on some of the other names that are on that list. You've got Teoscar Hernandez, Ronald Acuna, Andy Pajes, and Juan Soto. I think probably Soto ends up getting in. It would not shock me if one of the Dodgers got in. So I'll go ahead and say PCA gets one of the starting spots there. And then Carson Kelly, of all guys, ends up as a finalist going up against Will Smith. So Cubs could have as many as 3 All-Star starters in Atlanta in a couple of weeks. Any reactions to that list? I'm obviously not surprised by maybe any of the finalists, just kind of given where Kelly was in the catcher rankings. But what were your reactions to seeing that All-Star news?
I wasn't surprised at all. First of all, Cub fans always vote heavy in these things.
Especially
Remember,
when the team is good.
yeah, when the team is good. 2016, the Cubs sent 8 guys. And there hasn't been a lot of standout years from catchers in the National League.
No.
So, Carson Kelly kind of he's going to make the All-Star team in one of those they all get prettier at closing time situations.
I mean, he might end up being a reserve. You just don't know. Like, I'm not entirely sure who they end up designating for that type of a role, but I mean, he has boosted his batting average, I think, by 20 points the last 2 weeks. Like, he started to hit a little bit better. So I could see a scenario where Carson makes it as a backup.
Yeah, and especially because a lot of catchers, especially catchers who've gone before, get hurt 3 days before the All-Star break.
That would stand to
So
reason.
a guy like JT Realmuto would probably rather stay home.
I don't blame him for that either. So, but then again, the Phillies do have to send somebody. So who knows who that ends up being? Maybe
Kyle Schwarber.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the most likely scenario. Like, I can't see that not being the case, but you never quite know. So yeah,
he's gonna go. He's gonna be in the home run derby. He's gonna do all the fun stuff.
Do you think there's any scenario where PCA does the home run derby?
I thought he already said he wasn't doing it.
Oh, I did not see that. I apologize if that's the case. I
could be wrong.
I had that thought today, and I was like, "Oh dear God! Like, can he not? Like, I would much prefer him not to do that."
Yeah, I thought I'd seen.
Oh, yes, you were correct. ESPN did report that he has said he's not interested in doing it, which, frankly, good. I don't want him to. Of all of the guys that it could potentially impact their swing, I feel like PCA might be one that it really would happen to.
Although it'd be pretty funny because, it's basically batting practice pitching. So how would PCA do swinging at nothing but strikes?
That's, I guess, a fair point.
I don't know how he do.
That's a very fair point, Frank. I didn't even think about that. Just go hit the ball hard and see what happens.
Yeah.
All right, so we've kind of had our fun today, but we do unfortunately have to end the show on a bit of a sad note here. This week, Dave Parker ended up passing away, former MVP, Hall of Famer, just an all-around badass. I think is a very fair way of describing Dave Parker. Like, you just see like that era of baseball in the late 70s and into the 80s. Like, he just embodied it and was so freaking cool. And his stats, if you look them up, are just completely unbelievable. Just seemed like the coolest guy in the room at all times and could really play the game beautifully. And obviously, I don't remember a lot of Dave's career. He retired, I think I was like 5 or 6 years old at the time. So we will throw this over to the to the show's resident expert on that era of baseball. And Frank Nova, the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, the Pirates in the late 60s, all through the 70s, they had like a laboratory. And in this laboratory, they just built Cub killers. And some of them are the guys you would expect to be. Willie Stargell hit 50 career home runs against the Cubs, had a career 891 OPS. Roberto Clemente had 41 home runs against the Cubs, a career 866 OPS. Parker had a 905 career OPS and 27 home runs. But then there were guys like Bob Robertson. Bob Robertson was like the original Owen Casey, big redheaded slugger, had a career 914 OPS against the Cubs and hit 17 home runs. And the Cub killer the Cubs wound up going out and getting was Richie Hebner, who had a career 938
Good
OPS
God,
and
man.
hit 30 home runs against the Cubs.
How are these numbers don't even seem real, dude. Like, that's so nuts.
And guys who weren't necessarily home run hitters, like Al Oliver had some power. Al Oliver hit 29 home runs against the Cubs,
I insist that's the name
897.
you just made up. Al Oliver sounds really fake.
Oh, Al Oliver could hit, hit. His nickname was Scoop. Played for the Pirates, played for the Texas Rangers. Finished. He's one of those guys. He really should be in the Hall of Fame based on, especially with Dave Parker going in. Al Oliver has like 2,800 career hits.
Yeah. Multiple
And
time slugger winner, 7-time All-Star, won a batting title.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you makes a pretty compelling case, man.
Al could hit. And my favorite guy that I looked up, because I was like, okay, I have to find like the one Pirate guy who just wasn't a hitter and see how he did. Manny Sanguillen was their catcher, who became their emergency right fielder when Roberto Clemente died
Mm.
for 1 year before Dave Parker came and took over right field for Pittsburgh. Manny Sanguillen had 65 career home runs, 10 were against the Cubs.
Oh, shut up.
Just,
That's come
but
on.
it didn't matter who you put in a Pirates uniform, they mangled the Cubs.
Yeah.
There's 2 games. Well, actually, there's 3 games I distinctly remember. The first time I really remember seeing Dave Parker play, it was a game where the Pirates beat the Cubs 18-12. And I think Stargell and Parker each put 2 balls onto Sheffield Avenue.
Yeah.
I was
Crazy.
thanks to a Chicago Public Schools teacher strike, I was able to attend the game where the Pirates beat the Cubs 22-0. Rennie Stennett, their second baseman, went 7 for 7. And this is my all-time favorite Pirate story. I'm sorry, it's not about Dave Parker. It's about Willie Stargell. This was in 1969. My dad took me to a game. We're sitting in the bleachers, and this is when the Cubs were just trying to hang on. They were hanging on by their fingertips, and it wasn't happening.
Yep.
And the Cubs were playing the Pirates. It was late in the game. Cubs the Cubs closer, they didn't really call it that at the time, but their big relief pitcher was Phil Regan, who threw a spitter. Regan comes into the game to pitch to Willie Stargell. And I'm like, oh no, I'm 7 years old. I'm like, oh no, Stargell's gonna hit a home run. The Cubs are gonna lose. And my dad's like, don't worry about it. Regan's pitching. The wind is blowing in. Babe Ruth couldn't hit a home run out today. Words are barely out of his mouth, and the ball's on Sheffield.
That sounds about
Stargell's Stargell's rounding the bases. One of his 50 home runs against the Cubs, and Stargell's rounding the bases, and the ballpark is silent, and a guy sitting behind us leans in between my head and my dad's head and just says, "Bet you wish Babe Ruth was playing today."
Sounds like one of those crusty characters that you just inevitably run into at a ballpark. Like that just
Oh
I
yeah.
love that. Going to an Arizona Fall League game, you'll run into at least 4 or 5 guys who will say that exact phrase.
Yeah.
They somehow like fought in like, the War of 1812, and they remember like Orval Overall playing for the Cubs. Like just somehow those guys are still alive.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're the guys who can tell you stories about Lou the Mad Russian Novikov.
Wait, you can't tell me a Mad Russian story?
I can.
You know what? Let's just go ahead. I opened this Pandora's box. Please, by all means, continue. Yeah.
He was afraid of the ivy on the outfield wall because he thought that it was poison ivy. The groundskeeper had to take him out there, and the groundskeeper went up against the wall and rolled around up against the wall on the ivy to prove to him that it wasn't poison ivy. So once Novikov realized that it wasn't poison ivy, he then asked if he could smoke it.
I don't think there has been a better way for us to end a podcast this entire run so far than to end with that kind of a story, because I feel like that just sums up Cubdom in like an incredible way. So rather than saying like, this edition of Home Runs and Handshakes has been brought to you by the Best of the 70s collection, I'm just going to go ahead and say that it's been brought to you by the Mad Russian, because that was just a lovely little capper for all of that. So Frank,
Mad Russian dispensary.
I like how we now have not even, like, we didn't break down at all of the upcoming series against the Guardians and the Cardinals. And frankly, I'm willing to bet our producer Claire is going to be totally okay with that, because it'll just mean the podcast will have a longer shelf life. I literally am reading Claire Philby's mind right now. And by the way, happy late belated birthday to a Claire Philby, who probably turned, I don't know, like 23 or 24 this week, something like that. She is the young whippersnapper to Frank and I's curmudgeons, and we deeply appreciate everything she does for the podcast. And she certainly does her best to try to keep us young, even though I'm not sure she's entirely successful.
And she does the hard work to make it sound like we actually know what we're talking about.
I frankly couldn't have said it better myself, my friend. That is a great summation of the impact of a Claire Philby. So we have hit our hour with you. We hope that you guys have enjoyed trips down memory lane, some bold predictions that, given the track record of success that this podcast has in terms of pointing stuff out, are probably going to be horribly wrong. So we apologize in advance if that ends up happening. He's Frank Nova. I'm James Neveau. This has been Home Runs and Handshakes. We will talk to you guys next week.